Good afternoon. My name is Sean. I'll be doing today. It comes from John 13, verses 1 to 5. And John 13, verses 1 to 5. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. The word of God.
Thank you, Sean. Happy Palm Sunday, everyone. Would you turn to your neighbor and say Happy Palm Sunday? And this is a day that we historically celebrate the coming of Jesus into Jerusalem as we head into what is known as the Passion Week. It's the week that Jesus last ministered in Jerusalem, and he headed to the crucifixion, which we will remember and celebrate on Good Friday, and will lead to Easter. And in light of Palm Sunday, as well as, it is Palm Sunday, but also it is the last sermon of our 8-week sermon series on community, which we had entitled Community Matters. And in this series, I wanted to approach community from two angles, which is asking ourselves the question, what is the stuff that makes up a community? So community matters, right? What is the matter that makes up what a Christian community ought to be? So we did a deep dive into the theology of community for the last 7 weeks, and I want to thank you guys for going along that journey. I know sometimes it was dense, but I hope you got out of it as much as I have. But also, community matters as in community is important. It is important in the life of a Christian that you are part of a Christian community. You never grow alone. Your relationship with God is not just Him. It is us and God. And I hope I hope the things that we discussed was helpful to you, your understanding, expanding to that. And I just want to briefly review just where we've come. And so I went through all my sermons this past week that I preached the last 7 weeks. And I just wrote down some things that and minister to me and kind of I find important for us to sink our teeth into as a community. The first was that we become a gospel-revealing community, not a gospel-plus community. Meaning that what brings us together is not gospel plus our ethnicity, gospel plus our socioeconomic status, gospel plus our style or way of life. But it is a gospel-revealing community, meaning the reason that we are gathered here to people is because of the gospel, that our unity doesn't make sense to the world apart from the fact that we are together because of Jesus. So gospel-revealing community. And we talked about the Trinity as not only the maker, but the model of our community, that we dance around one another, we submit to and serve one another as the Father loves the Son, and the Son loves the Father, and the Spirit is the shared love between them. We talked about how the gospel tears down the walls of hostility caused by moral superiority and pride. Right? How superiority and pride is the great enemy to community. When we look down on one another, when we judge one another, and the gospel humbles us, it breaks down that wall, and it puts us on all on a level playing field. We talked about how Jesus builds his confession or builds his church on the confession that Jesus is, right? That what brings us together, and not only what brings us together, but what the Holy Spirit will build on, what God himself will bless, what he will rend the heavens and come and pour out his Spirit upon, is not good music, is not good preaching, but it is the gathering of God's people who say, Jesus is my number one, Jesus is your number one, our confession that Jesus is Lord. We talked about that. We talked about how love looks like the laying down of our own lives, what is important And that love looks like forgiveness. And we ought to practice this in our community. And we talked about specific practices. We talked about showing up, being present in the community. We talked about giving words of blessing to one another, seeing one another as God's beloved, and affirming one another in that. And we also talked about practicing forgiveness, confronting and confessing, and being willing to absorb the wrong that was done to us, because Jesus absorbed all the wrong that we have done onto him. Forgiveness is a critical element of community. That without forgiveness, there is no community. You can't be part of a community unless you're willing to extend forgiveness and receive forgiveness. We talked about community of proclamation, that we are a singing community, that we sing to Jesus and we sing about the story of Jesus, and that we encourage one another as we proclaim and sing together, that we want to be thermostat Christians, not Christians. Right? Remember that thermometer Christians just gauge whatever's going on and love Jesus accordingly. But thermostat Christians say, I love Jesus. I'm going to hold my position of love and raise up the temperature around me. We talked about being thermostat Christians. And lastly, last week we talked about how our oneness is a powerful gospel witness to this world. That we will convince the world of the goodness of God in having sent his Son and having loved us as much as he when we love one another. So all of these things together scream out to me, community matters. Community matters. Community for our spiritual life matters. And yet we come to possibly the most important or the most difficult question, I think, to answer, which is yes, but how? That sounds great, but how do we do that? And in order to answer that, we are going to study the life of the master community builder himself, who is Jesus. For Jesus was a master community builder. He left his community, the Trinity, to die and rise to give birth to a new community, which is the church. And if you look at his life, we see that Jesus valued community. It mattered to him. And he taught us what are the components that go into a community so that you and I may be the community that he wants us to be. So I think it's fitting on this Palm Sunday that we study one of the passages of Jesus one of the stories of Jesus that take place at the end of his life on the last week. And this story is a famous story. It's the story of washing the feet of his disciples. And usually we talk about how Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, and we talk about how Peter said, no, you will not wash my feet. And Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of me. And then Jesus gives his famous instructions, right? Just as I've done for you, do to one another. And I've preached that message many times before, but this week I was particularly moved by verses 1 through 5, which Sean read for us, which is the setup of all of that. And as Jesus, into these last moments that he has with his disciples before his crucifixion, he begins to take actions which I believe reveal the core components of what is required of you and me in order to build community. One more time, Jesus begins to participate in deliberate actions. We begin to see the attitudes of Jesus that are core ingredients to making a community work. And so the question I want to ask from all of us today is the question, what does community building require of me? What does community building require of you? Yes, we know that community matters, but how are you and how am I going to build this community together? We're going to study we're going to study the actions that Jesus took in these last moments. How did Jesus build community? How did he do it? How did our master community builder build community? What does that mean for us? What does community require of me? So I just want to share 4 simple things that touched my heart this week, or in the past several weeks as I meditated on this passage. First, just 4 simple things. First is this. In verse 1, it says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. He loved them till the end. And in that phrase, I see the first ingredient which is required of you and I in order to build community, which is time and commitment. Time and commitment. You cannot build community unless you are willing to input your time and commitment to build that community. Where am I getting this? That beautiful phrase, He loved them till the end. We see the endurance of Jesus. We see the perseverance of Jesus. We see the humility of Jesus. We see so many things in that phrase. And perhaps the most obvious thing to the phrase, He loved them till the end, means inferentially that He loved them in the beginning and the middle. That Jesus is able to be present with His disciples in the end because He started something with them and He endured the middle. That He called these disciples, these ragtag group of 12, who a lot of people I'm sure have wanted nothing to do with. There were tax collectors, there were uneducated fishermen, there was one of the political, his name escapes me, but one of the political zealots. I mean, it was a ragtag group of people, but He chose them. He began something with them. He committed to them. And of course, throughout the process, when Peter would act as Peter does, when the apostles will fight amongst one another, who is greater? They have the master of the universe Himself who put on flesh to become humble. And in His presence, they're arguing, who is the greatest? Who's the boss? Who's going to serve me? Through all the frustrations, ups and downs, and of course, Jesus knows with His foresight, He knows that He will be betrayed. He knows that they will leave Him. He knows that they will not be there with Him. And yet, again, He endured, and now He is able to be present with them at the end. Community requires time and commitment. It requires time and commitment. You know, it's not either time or commitment. I want us to understand that. It's not time or commitment. You see, imagine a bag of seed. You know, you could buy it at Home Depot, right? Or Korean markets, they sell like cucumbers and cucumber seeds in a little packet. If you first packet seed and you take it home and you leave it on your desk lovingly and gingerly and you say, you're going to grow me some cucumbers. And yet you do not plant that thing and you wait a week, a month, a year, guess what will happen? Nothing. Because you didn't commit to it. Yes, you spent time with that community or with that seed, but you did not plant or commit to that community, that plant. Versa is also true. Let's say you commit. Let's say you take that cucumber packet, you open it up, and you lovingly plant it in a pot. You water it, you stick it out in the sun, and next day you go out and you see, how dare you, nothing has happened, and you throw that thing out and you say, barren thing, useless. You would have also committed a silly mistake there. Why? Because you committed, but you didn't invest time. In order for you to see that cucumber plant fruit, bear flowers, and enjoy the fruit of your labors, you need both time and commitment. That's what community requires of you. Time and commitment. See, a lot of you have spent some time at our church, but you have not in your heart committed. So you're not experiencing the life of community, the pulsating life of community, the loving relationship that you and I are to. Just like Trinity loves one another, we get to experience a shadow of that here as we love one another. And yet, because you've spent time here, but not have committed in your heart and say, this is my community, maybe that's out of reach for you. You might feel gypped. You might feel like I'm lying to you, but actually, I want to turn the mirror around and say, maybe, just maybe, examining our hearts, maybe I've spent time, but I haven't committed. Vice versa, might be saying, I've committed. Where's the community? Where is it? Where is it? It takes time. You see, community building is far less like visiting a fast food restaurant and far more like making kimchi. Okay, now kimchi, for those of you who might not know what kimchi is, it's the national dish of Korea. It's fermented spicy cabbage. Okay, now you might be asking, why is that your national dish? Because Koreans were poor. Okay, so fast food takes almost no time and no commitment. Right? You just say, today I want to go to Chick-fil-A. You drive up, you order a number one or whatever you order, and you expect it to come out prepackaged as it's supposed to come out at every Chick-fil-A restaurant. Most of us treat church community like that. We enter into the church and we say, where's my community? Where's the provision for me? Where's the group? Where are people who love me? We spent a little bit of time there. It's not there. I bounce, right? Or I check out. That's how most of us treat community. We fast food restaurant. But community building right now, I'm telling you, is more like making kimchi the old school way. And let me tell you how my parents used to make kimchi when I lived in Korea, okay? First of all, it was a communal affair. You don't go up to a drive-through. It was like the grandma came, the grandpa came, all your cousins and aunts and uncles came. It was a party. They would get vats of kimchi because you don't just make a little pot of kimchi when you make it. Okay, this is not one of those hip things that people make, 장아찌 in a little bottle and give it out to different. No, this was a communal affair. The whole family would come. We would get cabbage. We would quarter the cabbage. We would wash the cabbage. We would stuff the cabbage with sauce or whatever. And then you would get the slurry mix, right? The red spicy slurry mix. You would get the red pepper flakes. You get fish sauce. You get shrimp paste. You get all sorts of different kind of seafoods. You mix it in there. And then you get each cabbage, Napa cabbage, pounds and pounds and pounds of cabbage. You peel back each layer and you stuff the cabbage, each of them. And then guess what? Day might go by doing this, and you're not done. I mean, we eat a little bit that day, but you're not done. Actually, we would stuff it into a giant jar. We had these giant clay pots, and we would stuff it, and then guess what? We didn't have kimchi refrigerators back then. What we did was we would go outside. We would dig a giant hole in the ground. We would bury the clay pot. We would put dirt over it. Snow would come and cover it. It would ferment. And then about 3-4 months later, when the ground had defrosted, we would get it out. And finally, after time and commitment, we would be able to enjoy some delicious, fermented, spicy, funky, complex, probiotic piece of kimchi. Health food. What's the difference? Time and commitment. Are you willing to put time and to realize what the Bible promises is true for believers, which is that you and I belong to one another in love? And in order to invest time and commitment, I want to put out a simple challenge for you, which is prioritize community in your life. Prioritization. Every person who leads a company or leads a team of engineers or even wants to just lead themselves understand the law of prioritization. There are many urgent things in your life. There are very few important things. And as a leader, you want to put important things first before you attend all the 1,000 urgent things. Well, this principle applies to community. Put community as first life. See, many of us are taught that we put God first. We don't practice it all the time, but we learn that, okay, I'm supposed to prioritize spending time with God in the morning. I'm supposed to prioritize Sunday service. But what about community? How many of us prioritize community in our lives? How many of us say, Wednesdays, community groups, untouchable to my friends, to even my family, because that's the time I have community. Sunday service, untouchable. Why? Not only me, God, but because it's my community. How many of us prioritize community? How many of us prioritize the community that we have as husband and wives? See, a marriage quickly disintegrates when you don't prioritize one another in that marriage. What about friendships? I'm sure all of us have friendships that have disintegrated over time. Why? Because we didn't give it. We got busy. We started dating. Work picked up. And I want to challenge us, if you believe in the biblical community that we're building here, and if you have bought into the fact that I have just said it requires time and commitment, then the most practical thing for you is to click out your pen or open your Google Calendar and say, this is my priority. Prioritize. Priorities reveal your time and commitment. Wherever you have most invested your time, dissect your life right now. If I take a look, not at your Google Calendar, but the way that you spent your last week, and I look at where your time and your commitment went, I guarantee you I will find what is most important to you. You naturally prioritized it. And I'm telling you today, well, it could be YouTube, it could be Instagram, it could be the money, stock market, it could be your son or daughter. You prioritized it. And I'm telling you right now, prioritize community. We see Jesus did that. He's there with them in the end because he was with them in the beginning and through the middle. Time and commitment. He didn't dip out in the middle. He didn't say, Peter, I'm going to switch you out, buddy. You go, Levi, come. let's start over. Okay, I'm a year and a half. I got a year and a half left. No. Time, commitment. Secondly, the second thing that community requires. Community requires disappointment, rejection, and betrayal. I want you to hear me one more time. True community will always, always, always require that you risk betrayal, that you risk rejection, and that you risk disappointment. Look with me to verse 2-4. It says this. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, he rose from supper. And I love that imagery of Jesus rising from supper. You see, the gospel writer John has already told us at this point, Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him. Jesus knows that Peter will deny him. Jesus knows that his friends, his dearest friends on all of the earth, the men that he puts time and commitment into, they will leave him at the hour of his greatest need. And yet the Bible says that he rises with decisiveness, with deliberation, with direction, and he rises not to expose Judas and not to escape his impending situation, but he rises to embrace his community once again. Why? Because the master community builder knows that in a lasting community, he must risk betrayal and rejection and disappointment. That's what it requires. Community building. If you want to genuinely be part of a community, you must risk rejection, disappointment, and betrayal. I want us to notice that Jesus is embracing individuals. That is not just an embracing of an idea of community, but he is literally going to wash the feet, to embrace. Washing the feet is a symbolic way of Jesus saying, I forgive you, I commit to you, I serve you. He embraced even Judas, the man, and heard him. I wonder how many of us in this room, if you look to the neighbor next to you and you knew that they will hurt you, they will reject you, they will betray you. I wonder how many of us would openly willing our lives and say, I embrace you. That's not easy. That's impossible, humanly speaking. And yet, look at the example of our Master. He rises not to escape, to expose, but to embrace. Why does community building require risk? Community building requires risk because love always requires risk. Love always requires risk. You think about marriage, marriage is risk. It might fail, your marriage. We don't want it to, but it does. When you say yes to that person, you are risking your life with someone else that might come along the way. It's a risk. You risk unhappiness. You risk infidelity. You risk disappointment. You risk you risk success, a wonderful marriage, and that person dying on you too early. You risk it. Love is a risk. What about bringing children into the world? You know, I heard Ryan Reynolds joking online. He was saying, Ryan Reynolds, the Blake Lively, you know, the actor. And he was saying, yeah, I love my wife so much. When I married her, I told her I would jump in front of any bullet for you. And then when my child was born, I realized, oh my gosh, for you, I would throw Blake in front of any bullet. You know, he was joking. He was saying how much he loves his kid. You know, having kids is a risk. Having kids is a risk. You go through the emotional ups and downs of from the womb. Is my baby healthy? And many parents know and go through the pain of finding out that their child might not be as healthy as they hope to be. Love is a risk. You bring that child into the world, and you want the world for that child. But we as parents know you deal with all sorts of other forces in life. You risk bringing pain to that child. You risk that child rejecting you, because as they grow up, you weren't the perfect parent. None of us will ever be. And of course, you're disappointing you. You had hoped so much for that child. You had wanted so much for that child. And to see that child walk a different path can be greatly disappointing. Love requires risk. And among friends, how many of us, or how many of us have never experienced pain in our relationships? Then I might, if that's the case, then I might say to you, you have never loved if no one in your life has caused you pain. In fact, some of us live in that state, don't we? We say, I don't want to be hurt, so what do? We don't love. Because to love requires pain. To love requires risk. And any of us who's been hurt by friends understand this intuitively. And so some of us, we go into that place of saying, I'll never love again. And if this is you, I want to say to you, I understand you very well. I understand. Just to share my brief story, in my high school days, just up until I received Christ, I was in a few dating relationships. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it can be mistaken because I think I was traumatized. But I had at least 3 or 4 women cheat on me, be unfaithful to me, do something else shady. I understand that comes with that kind of betrayal. And of course, your heart will say, I don't want to be hurt again. I don't want to love. But if that's you, I want to speak to you just from experience, but also as your pastor. I want to say to you, it hurts to love, but it hurts more not to love. It hurts to love. It always hurts to love. But it always hurts more not to love. Tim Keller says this, all loving relationships make us miserable because we don't love perfectly. And no one can perfectly here on earth. But he says, not loving makes us even more miserable because we were made for love. You were made for an eternal love from God, and in His reconstituted family, the church, we are to taste a glimpse of what a human relationship was supposed to look like. And if you refuse to commit to that because of some pains that you have experienced, I'm telling you right now, what will lead from that decision is not more joy, but more misery. Why? You were made for love. You were made for this. And I know that it's scary. It's scary when you hear, I must risk disappointment, betrayal, and rejection. Yes, you must. Why? And I want you to remember, the reason that we risk pain in some ways is because it is your duty or responsibility to love. If you're taking notes, I want you to write that word down, duty. It is your duty. You know, after something like this, I want to say something more flowery and more beautiful to say, yes, I want love. I want relationships. But sometimes I feel like doing that just feeds into our own ego. Do this because it's good for you. You need community for you. You need community for yourself. We're always turning in on ourselves. But what if I told you, you need to risk rejection and pain and betrayal to be part of a community? Seek healing so that you can do that. Why? As a matter of duty. This is your calling. I don't know what you think you're called to. So many of us think of calling as our careers, our jobs. So many of us think of our calling as praying or giving or reading the Bible. And those are all amazing things that I know God has called us to. And yet, unequivocally, without question, every single one of us in this room today are called by a matter of duty and responsibility to God to love. I want you to understand that Jesus didn't get up that day to wash the feet of His disciples. He didn't rise with decision and deliberation, not to expose nor to escape, but to embrace. He didn't do that just because He loved His disciples so much. It wasn't an emotional decision. He wasn't doing that just to show an example. I'm telling you, he did his duty to his Father. Jesus loved his Father. Jesus had a calling from his Father, a responsibility to his Father. He knew he had come from his Father. He was going back to his Father. And because he loved his Father, he got up, took a deep breath, looked at all those who would betray him, and he said, I will do more than risk. I'm going to give it all for you right now because I have a duty, son. You see, duty is not a sexy word in Christianity anymore, is it? It's not a sexy word in our community, in our culture anymore. Nobody likes duty. Who likes duty? We like freedom. We like independence. We like you do you. And I'm telling you right now, the Bible pushes us against that. Why? Because our duty is not to a law. Our duty is not to principles. Our duty is not to traditions. Our duty is to a person. You belong to someone. You have a master, a God, a king, a Lord, a lover. You have a duty to God. And that duty is that as he loves you and as he embraces you, you turn right around. You look at people that will possibly betray you in this room and you say, come over here. Let me embrace you. Do we understand this? Do we understand that community requires risk? Thirdly, community requires true humility. True humility. We talked about time and commitment. We talked rising from supper, risk. But it also takes true humility, doesn't it? Look with me to verse 4. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. I put true humility because there's two motions here that Jesus partakes in that reveal what humility is. And if you only do, it's a false humility. It's an incomplete humility. I want to talk about true humility. In this scene, we see that Jesus, in spending his last moments with his disciples, as he rises to wash their feet, he takes off a garment and he puts on a towel. And right there in those movements, we see what humility is all about. Humility is taking off, and humility is putting on. If you only take off but you never put on, it's an incomplete humility. If you only put on but you never take off, it's an incomplete humility. What am I talking about? You see, Jesus, by taking off his cloak, the robe of a rabbi, the robe of the leader, the robe of a master, Jesus was in some sense laying aside his identity as the superior. His identity as the superior. Sinful people, if I may say it differently, it is laying aside the identity of pride that we all carry. What are we proud about in our own lives? So many of us carry identities: wealthy, handsome, smart, proficient. And we humans are in the business of building up our egos. Why? Because we need to survive. We need to feel good about ourselves. We need to feel worthy. And so we build up these identities that are built on our ego. Others, you're less moral than me. You're less smart than me. You're less good with kids than me. We do this. We other others. We elevate ourselves. And yet Jesus takes off that cloak. Why? Because that's what first step of humility requires. It requires that you no longer identify yourself mainly with all the things that you think you're better than others at. It requires you laying that down and saying, I'm a beloved child of God. That's my first identity. Not me being better than you, but to him. Taking off that identity. But of course, it also implies that you put on an identity of service. The Bible tells us that he took on a towel and he tied it around his waist. In other words, he didn't just say, this is not who I am, this is who I am not, but he also said, but this is who I am. It was the garment of a servant. And in it lies the true image of what a humble person looks like. A humble person doesn't just not, but a humble person also says, this is who I am. I am a beloved of God, and I am his servant for your sake. This is humility. If you only do one, if you only take off without putting one on, then you are essentially still being proud, but not through your superiority, but through your inferiority, right? We talked about this. I'm a good person. I don't compare myself to, I'm not proud anymore. I don't look down. You know what you're doing? You're still circling around yourself. But there are those people who are really proud still. They never got rid of that finding their identity in what they're good at, but they put on the towel of service. You know what those people are? Those people are the kind of people that often fill a church. They add humility and service as just one of the many medals they wear to say, look how good I am. Take off, put on. That's what our King looks like. He put on true humility. This is exactly what Philippians 2 says about Jesus, that he emptied himself and he took on the form of a servant. Emptied, took off, put on. This is the movement of humility. And for us to put on an identity of service, that's what a child of God looks like. That's what members of a community that is successful at building community look like. We have all embraced our identity as God's beloved and God's servants. I'm a servant. Do you remember the movie Indiana Jones? It came out in the 80s, one of the older ones, The Last Crusade. You know, Indiana Jones movie scared the life out of me sometimes. You know, people are melting, there's bugs. It was frightening as a child. I don't know why my parents let me watch such things. Anyways, in Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, that's the one about the cup of immortality, right? It's the cup that Jesus drank out of. And do you remember in that, spoiler alert, in that scene, you know, Indy is there, one of the Nazis are there, and the evil scientist there, and they're supposed to pick the cup of Jesus that's going to give them the elixir of life. And there are many cups. There are cups of silver and diamond. And the Nazi picks up the gold cup. Obviously, this is a cup of a king. He drinks the water, thinking he's going to live forever, and then he melts away, right? He chose poorly. Indiana Jones looks around at all the cups. He picks the dirtiest, most raggedy-looking one. And do you remember what he says? This is the cup of a carpenter. No. That was the cup of a servant. That's the identity that you and I ought to have. We ought to be raggedy cups, not golden cups. Why? Because that's what humility looks like. And of course, when Indiana Jones and his father drank it, it gave them life. God wants to breathe life to the world and to people around you when you embrace your identity as a servant. You know, in Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, there's a fabulous line about Aragorn, the king. Aragorn has been working all of his life to become the king. He enters into the capital. He just won a great war, but nobody recognizes him or understands him as king until this happens. You see, some people are really sick. They've been breathed on by the Nazgul, you know, the big black shrieking things, and they're dying of hopelessness. And Aragorn, of all the people in that city, Aragorn alone knows how to treat them. And he begins to get some flowers, and he begins to beat it into a paste, and he begins to breathe life into them. One of the nurses begins to speak a prophecy, and she says, "The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, so shall the rightful king be known." The hands of a king are the hands of a healer, so shall the rightful king be known. I want to say, the garments of a king are the garments of a servant, so shall the rightful king be known. That's Jesus. The garments of a king are the garments of a servant, so shall. But more than that, or for us, this truth applied to us, the garments of a child of a king are the garments of a servant. So shall the rightful child of God be known. Are you a child of God? What garments are you wearing? It is the garment of a servant. Strip of your pride. Put on humility. Is it the garment or is it something else? Lastly, the last thing that community requires. In verse 5, it says, then Jesus poured out water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with that was wrapped around. He poured water. He began to wash. He wiped them. Jesus engaged in practical action. That's what community requires. It's the fourth thing. That one's not immensely revelatory. It's very simple. It requires practical action. There's no good for you committing and taking time. No good in you taking time or just taking risks. There's no even good if you say, okay, I'm not better than everyone. I'm a servant of everyone. There's no going all of that if there's no action. You need to take action. You need to do something. Do you remember the parable of Jesus? Jesus says this in the book of Matthew. What do you think? A man had 2 children. And he went to the first one and said, go and work in the vineyard today. And the first child said, I will not. But after the first changed their mind and went. And he went to the other one and he said the same. And he said, I will go, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 children did the will of his father? And they said, the first. And Jesus said, that's right. Why? Because he did something. He engaged in action. You know, at the end of this scene today, Jesus begins to wash their feet. Then he wipes his hands. Their feet must be filthy. They've been walking around in the Galilean Jerusalem dust. This was a task that the lowest of the lowest servants would engage in. There's no way that a rabbi and a master would do this. And yet Jesus does this. He wipes off his hand. He wipes his sweat. The disciples are looking at him like, this dude is crazy. What did he just do for us? And he says these words, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do, just as I have done for you. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Are we doing, church? What are we doing? What are you doing? You prioritize time? Great. You got a garment of humility? Great. You're going to risk it all? Great. What are you doing? And for this one, I just want to ask, before the things we could do, I just want to say, be intentional. Doing requires intentionality. And I just want to speak briefly on this. We see Jesus' intentionality in 2 different ways. Number one, he met a real need of others. Their feet were stinky. It was dirty. They needed it washed before meal. He met a need intentionally. You know, I do this myself, and it's human behavior. It really is a behavior that we need to grow and mature out of, which is we love them the way we want to love and not the way that they need to be loved. And then we get mad when they reject our love. How can you not receive my love? I gave everything for. Well, maybe you weren't meeting what they need. Intentionality. You examine that person, don't shampoo their hair. They need their feet washed. Don't get them new clothes. They need their feet washed. Don't feed them. They don't need you to feed them. They need their feet. But he was also intentional in that he drew near to their dirtiest places, didn't he? Think about that. Like I said, it was a demeaning job, a servant's job, a very lowly task. And yet we see Jesus coming into the most dirtiest, broken parts, if you will. And I wonder if our community can be a community that looks at one another, looks at the dirtiest parts of our lives and say, I'm there. Embrace you there. I want to meet you there. Where you're ashamed, where you're broken, I'm willing to companion with you, sit with you there, to sit next to you in your pool of tears. Intentionality. And of course, this means that if you want to be part of community, you must let people wash your feet. Do you remember Peter? You shall not wash my feet. And Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of it. I'm telling you right now, if you don't let the community of God wash your feet, you have no part of them. You can't.
if you're always hiding, putting up an image, never letting people meet you where you are the most broken and vulnerable and ashamed, you're not going to participate in the community that God has for you. Intentionality, both in giving and in receiving. This is how we do. This is how we do. Jessica, if I can ask you to join me. So just quick review. First, community requires time, commitment. Your time and commitment. Second, and with that we talked about prioritization. Prioritize community. Secondly, community requires disappointment, rejection, and betrayal. And with that, remember, this is our calling. You can overcome as you grab hold of His love for you and you grab a hold of your love for Him, the Father. We said community requires true humility, the taking off of our false identities and putting on our true identities as sons and daughters and servants of God. And lastly, we said there's practical action in the form of intentional actions, drawing near to people where they really need it and drawing near to people where they most need it, most broken, most hurt. Amen? This is what we're going to do. This is what is required of us to build community. Where do we get the power to do this? Where? How in the world are you and I going to get the power to do this? Well, the answer is in John chapter 13, verse 3. It says it right there. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into His hands and that He had come from God and was going back to God, He rose from supper. You know, this passage is talking about the fact that Jesus left His Father. He came into the world. He committed to us. And then He's about to die on the cross for the sins. If you really think about it, Jesus left eternity to commit to time, didn't He? He committed to time. He didn't only leave His Father to risk rejection, but He received it. He received disappointment. He received betrayal. Jesus took off His glory when He left His Father and He came into earth and He put on the robes of humility. And of course, Jesus took action all throughout His life. Most significantly, as we remember this week, He died on the cross. And because Jesus left the Father, He came into the world. Through His humility, He knew that the Father had given Him all things into His hands, and He was going back to the Father. Because Jesus made a way for you and I to enter into that community and into this community, because of Jesus, you and I could look at these four and say, yes. Because I've received His love. I've received His grace. I've received His coming and going. But you know, even more, not even more, but on top of that, the profundity of this is this. You know, that phrase, coming from God and going back to God, is a phrase that is repeated throughout John, the Gospel of John, several times. In John chapter 8, verse 14, Jesus, where I come from and where I'm going, but you Pharisees, you don't know where I come from and where I'm going. And in John chapter 16, Jesus tells His disciples, I came from the Father and I'm in the world. Now I'm leaving the world and going back to the Father. Over and over again in the Gospel of John, this idea of Jesus coming and going, leaving the Father into the world and going back to the Father is repeated. And is repeated to tell us His identity. Who is He? The Pharisees didn't understand. So Jesus said, you don't know where I come from, where I'm going. The disciples are like, who are you exactly? I'm going back to the Father. I came from the Father. I'm coming back to the Father. Belonging to the Father was at the central reality of Jesus' identity. Well, guess what? Coming from the Father and going back to the Father is not only the identity of Jesus, but it's your identity. It's yours. How do I know this? John chapter 3, verses 6 through 8. You know, this passage is famous because right after this, Jesus says, for God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. But look how Jesus describes people who are born again in the Spirit. Listen to this. That which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel, I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes. You hear its sound. You don't know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. What is he saying? He's saying if you're born of the Spirit, the world will not know and where you're going, just like me. But I know where you came from and where you're going. You'll know where you came from and where you're going. You belong to the Father. And so that means, just like Jesus, because your identity is so secure in God, that you know that you're not from Korea, or you're not from the United States, you're not from Kaiser Hospital, you're from the Father. Your destiny is not wealth, is not the grave, is not nirvana or karma. No, your destiny is back to the Father. And if you're so rooted in the Father as the beloved, as Jesus was, then on this world, guess what? As you journey through risk, as you journey through time and commitment, as you journey through pain, as you journey through all the opportunities and all the pains that cry out at us to say, embrace me, you can, like Jesus, open your arms and embrace even those who will kill you and crush you. Why? Because you know where you come from. You know where you're going. You know where you belong. And so you come in which you do not belong and you say, I love you with the love of Jesus, the same love I received. I don't know if we have the picture. Thank you, Mike, for working so hard to get this picture up. I say that because technical difficulties that arise with that. That's a cactus. Loving a community is like hugging a bunch of cactuses. No, I'm serious. That's a small one, but imagine if it was a life-size one and you hug it. You know what happens when you hug a cactus? It hurts. It really, really hurts. But before you go and bravely hug a cactus, you ought to remember that you are the cactus that Jesus hugged. And when Jesus embraced the cactus of humanity, pricked, he died. He died hugging us. He died embracing us. He died, it hurts not running. He died and he let his embrace kill him. And when you and I receive that love of God, guess what happens? The cactus doesn't just stay spiky anymore. Could you show the next picture? The cactus flowers. This is you. A lot of spikes. But new life happens when you embrace the cactus hugger's love. Let me ask you something. Do we want to be a community of cactuses? Because we already are. There's no denying that. Do we want to be a community of cactuses that just poke one another? Or are we going to be a community of cactus huggers who begin to flower and who say, let me embrace you with this love. And as you do, it might poke you, it might hurt, but just like the blood ran red and begin to heal a broken humanity, so will our love for one another begin to heal one another. Let it flower, if you will, if we're willing to become cactus huggers. Church, that's my invitation. Throughout this whole series, receive the embrace of the cactus hugger, who's Jesus. And let's be a community transformed by his love, flowering to life, turn to one another and embrace other cactuses of this world.